organization for such a well-managed conference. It's really nice to be here, and I also want to thank you personally for your welcome. It's nice to be in India. So, as Jaime has mentioned, I'll be speaking to you this afternoon on three subjects. The first one is WCO Economic Competitiveness Package, which was created after the financial crisis has hit the world, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Then the globally networked customs, which is the connection customs to customs. I'll talk about that, and I know the panel before us, there was a gentleman from customs that also spoke about GNC, and I have a different opinion than he does have. He's from customs, I'm a customs broker, so I'll tell you the opinion I have. And I'll finish with the IFCBA best practice model for customs brokers regulation. As you know, it's not everywhere in the world that customs brokers are regulated or licensed, and they should. So what we did at the IFCBA is that we've developed a best practice model, and I'll discuss about that. I want to come back to this slide. Unfortunately, Carol will steal my thunder a little bit, because I wanted to give you 3 minutes and say whoever can explain this slide to me, I give him a prize. But nobody can. But what this outlines, as Carol mentioned, this is the supply chain mapping of an importer, a large importer. And as you can see, it's very complex, and it crosses many borders, so customs is involved in there. And customs can severely impact, positively or negatively, that customer supply chain. And large corporations want to invest, they want to develop, and they want to invest either by building manufacturing plant or by building distribution centers, and they will look at countries where to establish these plants or these distribution centers. And one of the first things they will look at is how complex is the customs regulation in that country. And as Carol has mentioned, what they are looking for is transparency, predictability, efficiency, and also the engagement with the private sector. So that brings me to talk about the economic competitiveness package. Companies that invest in countries, if let's say someone, a large corporation comes here in India and they build a big plant, that means that they invest business in the country. It increases the volume of import and export, and that, of course, is very good for customs brokers. They create new jobs. By creating new jobs, there's more income tax, which is paid to the country, and because they increase the volume, the GDP of the country goes up. So after the aftermath of the financial crisis, the WCO thought, what is needed by a country to really be open to business, and how customs can contribute to the economic competitiveness of its country to help the country recover from the financial crisis. And this is what WCO came with. One, raising the awareness of the WCO instruments and tools. So that's the revised Kyoto Convention, which is for the harmonization, simplification, and modernization of the customs administration and procedures. Also the SAFE framework. Encourage wider spread of the implementation of the WCO instruments and tools. And of course, encourage the accession to the revised Kyoto Convention, and as Carol mentioned, also measure the effectiveness of its implementation. Also, contributing to the economic competitiveness is done by improving border operations. Again, predictability, speed, and transparency. So the border operations have to be fluent, they have to be seamless, they have to be easy. And this is very important for a country to get these foreign investments. Supporting legitimate trade. Get rid of potential conflicts, protect the intellectual property rights, make sure you don't have counterfeited goods, get rid of corruption, enhance the informal trade sector compliance. Customs in the countries should have forum to be able to talk with the private sector for decision makers. The customs in the country should not be in isolation, taking decisions, putting regulations and together without the involvement of the private sector. It's very important that the private sector, including the brokers, participate to that. In my country, in Canada, we do have a forum and various forums where the private sector takes really participation with the government, with customs, to look at the creation of new regulation, new rules, new processes, and even through the Canadian Society of Customs Broker, we sit on various subcommittees to be able to give our views and the views of the private sector on what customs wants to come out with new regulations and processes, and that helps in the implementation because we participate into that. And finally, of course, increase the international trade volume. So the economic competitiveness package was approved by the WCO in June 2012. Now, if we move to the next slide, the globally networked customs, GNC, from a customs broker's view. So it is one of the 10 interconnected building blocks in the WCO Customs in the 21st Century Strategic Framework, and it has to do with customs being connected to customs, but we also want to see business being connected to customs and customs being connected to business. What are the possibilities of GNC? First, internationally standardized data requirements for export, transit, and import. What we don't want to see are nations' standards and that they be different all around the world. They should be internationally standardized, and there should be one set of standards. Then interconnected systems to enable the electronic exchange of data between customs administration as early as possible in the international movement of goods. So, and this is where I differ a little bit from the comment that the customs individual mentioned in the previous panel. When we're talking of interconnectivity for data, we're talking of data for admissibility perspective and security perspective. Not for release, not for entry, and not for accounting. So what we want to see is that the export customs administration will transmit data to the import customs administration of the destination country only for admissibility and security perspective, and this should happen as soon as possible in that transaction. There's also should be mutual recognition and coordination protocols between administrations to eliminate unnecessary duplication and control in international supply chain. If we take a shipment that leaves, let's say, India, and India collects information, they review the information, and they are okay with the information, and they release the cargo, if that shipment goes through the United States to eventually end up in Canada, we want to avoid that U.S. Customs has to review again the same type of information, examine the information, give their okay, and when it gets to Canada, the Canada does again the same thing. That only stops and delays the supply chain. So that interconnectivity for that type of data will help. There should also be rules governing the exchange of information between customs administrations, especially in regards to data protection. Data should be protected, and the confidentiality of that data should also be protected. What does business want to expect from GNC? Well, customs administrations are gateway to nations, and it shouldn't be complex. More complex they are, less trade they'll have. The less complex customs is, more trade that country will get. The WCO should take the lead in facilitating the rapid adoption of the most advanced technologies. It's important that when we talk about technology, that we use pretty much the same technology. If technology is different country by country, that means that the service provider that does business with various countries will need to adapt to various technology. So it's important that the WCO should take the lead to facilitate the rapid adoption of the most advanced technologies and the standardized technology. As Carol has mentioned also, single window should be developed by Customs Administration. In my country, unfortunately, we transmit data to Customs, but we have to transmit data also to Transport, Food and Drug, and other government departments. What we would like to see is that we transmit all of that data to Customs, and Customs transmit internally data to the other Customs or government departments, and they take care of that. The private sector technologists are well placed also to assist in the design of a global GNC environment using the latest technology. Technology is a tool which is actually used by the private sector, being the cloud technology or whatever, and Customs Administration should go to the private sector and work with the private sector to look at what's in place and use the same tools and the same systems that are actually used by trade. And again, connectivity should not only be customs to customs, but it should be business to customs and also customs back to the business. The business expectation regarding GNC: only minimal data critically required to satisfy the instant need of the exporting and importing country should be required in a GNC environment. And again, that data should only be for admissibility and also for a security perspective. No entry data, no revenue data, no release data. We recommend an essential role for the WCO should be to facilitate the identification of advanced technologies I've mentioned, which enable GNC and the training of Customs Administration. And something important also, the world cannot wait for all countries to embrace interconnectivity. There are some countries, some Customs Administration in the world right now as we speak, that don't have systems. They still rely on paper. Other Customs Administration are partway automated, and others are very highly automated. We can't wait until all of these little countries catch up. So the WCO should be playing a role to make sure that countries embrace interconnectivity and also embrace the technology. Underlying GNC must be done by a robust governance structure so that specific rules apply, and also a tenet of the revised Kyoto Convention and SAFE is engaged in the private sector. The next topic that I want to address is the best practice model for customs broker regulation. As I've mentioned a little bit previously, it's not everywhere in the world where customs brokers are regulated or customs brokers are licensed. And unfortunately, in many countries of the world, a carrier, a freight forwarder can do an entry. We strongly believe that entries, customs entries on behalf of importers can only be done by professionals, and the professionals are the customs brokers. So we've created a best practice model that we use and that we show to Customs Administration, that we have shown to the World Customs Organization, and that we are using also through how do we say that? Through capacity building work that we are doing through the WCO or through the World Bank. And Janice will talk about that. We have two experiences, one with Laos and the other one with Vietnam. These are two countries that don't have a customs broker regulation, and they want to regulate that profession because they see the value that customs broker bring not only to trade but also to government. So we're using that IFCBA best practice model for these capacity building projects. So there's three objectives. The first one is to establish a database of existing practices concerning licensing of customs brokers in IFCBA member countries. Second one is to provide a basis for submissions on customs broker licensing. And the third one is to create a best practice recommendations on customs broker licensing for customs administration. And that best practice model, most of the IFCBA members have contributed to it, and you see the members in the bottom of the slide, and as you can see, India has participated in the creation of that best practice model. What does it consist of? General principles is that the regulation of licensing of customs brokers is a responsibility of government, not a third party, not the customs brokers themselves, but government. Regulation may be for individuals and or business entities. In my country, it's the government that licenses the customs brokers, that issue regulations for the customs brokers, and it's for both the individual as well as the corporation, the business entity. Regulatory body most often is the customs administration. We feel that customs know our business, so it's the best body to be able to regulate customs brokers. And there is a need to set out the scope of practice, which may vary from country to country, but it's important that there is a scope of practice that tells what customs broker can and cannot do. Also, importers should only be allowed to use licensed customs brokers as third parties to transact business with customs. They should not be allowed to use a carrier or a freight forwarder, but they should be able to use only a customs broker. Mind you, the same corporation can be and a freight forwarder and a licensed broker, but it needs to be a licensed broker. Also, in most countries around the world, importers can do their own entries. However, we feel that importers that are acting on their own behalf to transact business with customs must meet the same knowledge standards as customs brokers. So if there is a standard of knowledge and skill set required for customs brokers, if a company wants to do their own brokerage or transact directly with customs, they should be under the same requirements. Licensed customs brokers may direct and supervise the work of employees within their organization that performs release and accounting functions. And customs brokers may wish also to assume joint and several liability for their customers' payment of duties and taxes. And this is a choice that the customs broker should be allowed to take. Either they want to be part of that financial transaction of payment of duties and taxes, or they don't. But that should be the customs broker's decision. Now, what should be the requirements applying to individuals that want to become customs brokers? Well, first, it should be a citizen or a permanent resident of that country where such legislation exists. That individual should have reached also the legislated age of majority and provide records that would demonstrate the following. One, that the individual has a minimum experience requirement, usually between 3 to 5 years in a customs brokerage environment, or that individual has successfully completed a training program as required by the country legislation or regulation, and also successfully completed a license examination or equivalent procedure. Pass a credit check history, and of course, not being a crook, so have no violation of a serious nature regarding imports and exports. From a corporation perspective, in a best practice model, there should be evidence of a financial stability, so through giving the copies of the financial statement, and also financial guarantees or security deposit where payment of duties and taxes is made on behalf of an importer by the customs broker. And I know this is also a topic that was mentioned by the gentleman from India Customs this morning. Also, to be seen as professional and recognized as professional, we have to act as such, and we should have specific rules under which we conduct our operations on behalf of our customers. So customs brokers should establish standards of professional practice on a national basis to protect the client's interest. The knowledge and skill requirements in customs brokerage are best acquired and developed through ongoing professional development within the industry. And I want to say here, ongoing professional development, not getting a license and you're still a good customs broker 20 years after. It should be ongoing to be able to demonstrate that the customs broker has kept up with the knowledge and the skill requirement to be a professional customs broker. Courses, seminars, and event provided by Customs Brokers Association, and this is good for a Customs Broker Association to prepare courses and to charge for that, and the people working for customs brokers could get more knowledge by following these courses. It could also be corporate in-house training that is done by the customs broker, informal on-the-job training, or education which is done by third party, as long as they are recognized by the national education institutions. Customs brokers also must demonstrate continued financial stability. They must demonstrate high level of customs compliance, and that can be done by self-auditing, by having KPIs, key performance indicators, by maintaining a scorecard that can be shown to customs or customers. Customs brokerage training, including e-training opportunities, should be widely available, and again, this is something very good for customs brokerage associations to prepare that and get some funding. And the suspension or cancellation of a customs broker's license must be subject to appeal. Customs authorities should not be able to just come and take away a license. There should be an appeal mechanism, and the suspension or cancellation should not take place until the finalization of that appeal process. So this is the best practice model for customs brokers regulation and licensing that the IFCBA has created. And as I've mentioned, we are using it when we're doing some capacity building work. We have given a copy to the World Customs Organization, and it's on our website, I guess, and you could also have access to it and use it if you want. And we encourage customs administrations around the world who don't have a licensing regime or regulation to look at the best practice model so that they can create an efficient and professional customs brokerage environment. So this being said, I thank you very much, and we will go to the next panelist. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Michel. I can see that we're getting close, well, not very, very close, but I think we are a little bit pushed for time to finish our session on time. So I'm going to ask you to save your questions until the end, where we'll have a session of questions and answers. And I'll ask Federico Kiko Zúñiga from the US to make his presentation. Federico has been the chairman of the National US Customs Brokers Association. He is also past chairman of the IFCBA, and he is also a licensed customs broker for many years in the US. Kiko.
Thank you very much, Jaime. First off, before I get started on my comments, I'd like all of you all to just take a second to applaud yourselves for being logistics providers, facilitators, and supporters of global economy. So all of you that are brokers are actually a big part of the global economy, and you should all applaud yourselves for the work that you do. You know, in the United States, about 2 years ago, the Customs Service went into a process of of trying to go through the customs regulations that pertain to the broker and rewrite some of the processes. One of the big glaring things that we saw as a National Brokers Association in the United States was this actually going from the best practices that the IFCBA put forward was the fact that in the United States, a licensed customs broker, once they had passed and fulfilled their obligation to pass their broker's exam, had no requirement in the regulations, none whatsoever, to do any continuing education. So a broker, in my case, in my firm, my father, who was in the business, started the business and was in the business 30 years before me, never had to keep up with the regulations. So towards the latter part of his work in our business, while he had a lot of practical knowledge because of his day-to-day operation, there was a lot of regulations, foreign trade agreements, things of this nature, other agencies that became involved in international trade, Food and Drug Administration, for instance, that he had not kept up with. So for him to be able to say that he was knowledgeable and professional in our industry was difficult. So with that experience, personal experience, and with the document that the IFCBA put for best practices, in the United States as an association, we went to the Customs Service and said, we want you to require us to do continuing education. We want you to make it mandatory. And at first, the Customs Service was not very interested in doing that. I'm not exactly sure why. Maybe it was budgetary. Maybe they didn't have the budget to maintain that process. So as an association, we decided to implement a certification program and become more professional as an industry ourselves and require continuing education ourselves to maintain that professionalism that I think everyone deserves. Not only our clients, but the countries that we work in deserve us to be as professional as possible to make sure that we take care of the security of our countries and make sure that the flow of commerce is seamless. So that being said, so we did this certification. We've been working on it. And again, I want to thank the Canadian Brokers Association for bringing this program to the United States. I give them a lot of credit because they were the first to do this as far as education. And I'm very happy to see that India has an educational department within the FFFAI. Shantanu, of course, I wouldn't expect anything less, knowing who you are, seeing your work in the managing board, that India would be on top of this and make sure that that professionalism is there. So that being said, we started this process. We said, let's not wait for the government to make it mandatory. Let's do it ourselves. Well, now the government has said, you know what? It's not a bad idea. So in the regulations that are being discussed today, it is going to be a requirement. It is going to be mandatory to have continuing education. Of course, regulations, government regulations take time. So it's in the discussion process, the deliberation process. But the fact is that it is acknowledged and it will be a requirement. So this is a good thing. One of the other things that has come out through these rewrite of the broker regulations, the customs broker regulations, is I think that the government has acknowledged that the brokerage community is a very important part of international trade. It's a very important part of their function for government. They know we are a force multiplier, that without us, the work cannot be done properly. So that acknowledgement is a good thing, but that acknowledgement and that additional responsibility that comes with that acknowledgement also requires more professionalism. It requires more responsibility, and this is where we need to be very careful with the regulations. As an example, one of the other documents or one of the other items that the Customs Service wants to engage us in is the vetting or the verification of an importer. How do we vet that the people that we're representing are the right people? How do we make sure that the people that we're doing the work for are not a criminal element? So they want us to be able to go and verify that the people that we represent are valid, honest, reputable importers. The problem that we see is that we work on documents. Our brokerage community works based on documentation. It's very difficult for someone in Laredo, Texas, on the southern border of the United States, to validate and verify an importer of product that's being bought from a purchaser in the middle of China. So what we've told the government is we will be more than happy to do this work if you give us a list of documents that will be required, that will satisfy your requirement for this vetting process. Tell us exactly what it is that you want us to verify document-wise, and we will make sure that we receive those documents and vet them properly to your satisfaction. And so that's the discussion on our increased role. So all we're telling the government is we will accept that responsibility. We will accept the process that you're asking us to do because we know we're an integral part of the chain. But tell us exactly what it is in documentation that you would require for it to be good for you. And that goes back to some of the other comments that were said by some of my